2030. Sandy is joined by Roger Meacock, our consultant veterinary surgeon, who also knows a whole lot about animals and farms and the agenda of what's going on. And farmers are being, it would appear they're being stopped from producing food for us, and their land is being used for other things. And it's not just about inheritance tax. And today we're going to be moving away from the history that we covered in part 1 and some of the infrastructure differences in part 2. And today we're going to be focusing on food and a whole heap more. We're going to be looking at what are we going to eat? We're going to look at what is the life ahead for a farmer? How does it figure? We're going to be looking at the climate and nature bill as well. So we've got a lot to fit in. But in part 2, we finished on Bovaer, and many of you will have already picked up that Arla and Bovaer inextricably linked. This is the additive that's being added to cattle feed in order to stop carbon emissions, i.e. them passing wind, of which Roger has done a lot of work on. And we finished part 2 with Bovaer. And as we're recording this now, it's the day after President Trump has been inaugurated, and not many people are thinking about what they're reaching for on the supermarket shelves anymore. So I'm going to be starting off with Roger talking about Bovaer. But just for now, let's say a very quick hello to Sandy. Sandy, thank you so much for joining us for part 3. Can you believe we're here? Sandy, welcome.
Thank you very much, Debbie. It's great to be back and to be talking about all this stuff. Bless you. Thanks a lot.
Well, it's amazing that we've got such incredible people such as you who are doing all the work for those that are watching. And it's not just for farmers, it's for us, the public, because we all eat. And so let's join and say hello to Roger Meacock. Roger, thank you again for joining us for part 3. Welcome to the UK column.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody who's watching. Yeah, it's great to be back. And as Sandy said, this is the sort of information that people need to be discussing and talking about because, I don't think it's quite got the stigma it had before, but we do need to, make everybody aware and discuss it and talk about it.
We do indeed, Roger. And as we know that the agenda is now not just being accelerated, it's being turbocharged. So I'm going to say it now in case I forget to say it later. But if you like what the UK column are doing and you think that what we're producing is valuable, please share the content because part 1, part 2, and now this part 3 are historical and they're going to be a history forever. So please download them. So Roger, could you just give us a brief resume of where we finished last time in part 2 on how you came to scrutinise Bovaer, what you found out and what you found out since?
I think everybody knows that Arla tweeted about they were going to start this 30-farm trial using Bovaer in dairy cattle to try and reduce methane emissions. And I was concerned, obviously, and so I contacted the Veterinary Medicines Directive because Bovaer was passed as a feed additive. And so I queried them as to why it hadn't been categorized as a pharmaceutical like the FDA had done in the United States. So they got back to me and basically said, oh, well, the manufacturer had pretty well self-certified. They chose the category and applied for the category. And because it didn't involve then as a feed additive, didn't involve the VMD didn't get involved. And then the chief veterinary officer also replied and pointed out, one of the things that I was pointing out was that there was therefore a gap because who's the FSA, Food Standards Agency, to be involved in the veterinary assessment of the product? They were looking at it in terms of what was safe for us, for humans consuming the milk, but they haven't got a veterinary aspect to what they do. So anyway, to bring us up to date, I actually had a response from the Food Standard Agency yesterday, and they sort of came up with their usual spiel saying, oh, we've looked at it, and yes, we did look at it for to see whether it was safe for cows, and our scientific committee sat on it, an advisory committee, and they've passed it and we think it's safe. So I've responded to them and said, well, that doesn't fit in with what the chief veterinary officer has said to me in terms of there is a gap in terms of animal health and welfare assessment because the Food Standards Agency haven't got a veterinary aspect. I told them I was concerned that they hadn't admitted that themselves, and there would seem to be a gap in the legislation, given that Bovaer, as I gather, is licensed for use in cattle other than lactating cattle in some other countries. And the fact that the manufacturer had perhaps only applied for the license in lactating cows meant that they were effectively playing the system. They knew what they could get past, and they knew how they could get it categorized as a food additive rather than trying to get it passed as a veterinary pharmaceutical. And I said I didn't care who sat on the committee or how highly qualified they were, but if the work hadn't been done in terms of the length of trial that was adequately mirror what was going to happen thereafter, then there wasn't the data for whoever on whatever committee to have a look at and make some sort of judgment as to the safety in cattle. We have no data when it comes down to it, what the cumulative effect of cows having Bovaer in their food is. And I said, on that basis that they hadn't been fully transparent with me, I didn't trust the process and I didn't trust what they were saying. And that's basically where we've got to now. So, it doesn't look like there's going to be any withdrawal of Bovaer at this immediate time. I also pointed out to the Food Standard Agency that they are a government agency. They are therefore effectively, work for the public. And the public have made it very clear that we do not want Bovaer being included in our food chain, albeit, fed to the cows. The milk will still go into our food chain, and therefore they are part of that food chain. And the public have been very outspoken, to the point where they even issued statements themselves. They recognise that the public doesn't want Bovaer. There is no need for it, and ultimately they need to be doing what the public wants. And given that there's no super imperative for it to be introduced immediately and fast tracked, then they should have demanded that there were proper length trials if that's what they wanted to do. And because they haven't demanded those long-term trials, as far as I'm concerned, the product has been fast-tracked.
Yet again, then, Roger, we find ourselves in a situation where we've got fast-track. So, like with the COVID-19 vaccines that were fast-tracked. So if we don't know if Bovaer is safe for cattle, we cannot possibly know that it's safe for humans. Am I right in saying that?
I think certainly in the long term, they've looked at the short term and they say there's very little of the active ingredient in Bovaer that goes into the milk and therefore it is safe. But what we don't know is when cattle are fed Bovaer on a long-term basis, does that metabolism within them change? We know that there is, the Food Standard Agency didn't categorically say that there was no genotoxicity, so no potential harm to the DNA. So if there is genotoxicity and there is some sort of cumulative adverse effect on the cattle, then we don't know how that composition of milk will potentially change over time. And people will no doubt say, or some of the scientists might say, I'm being, a bit OTT and all the rest of it. But ultimately, they don't know. And as far as I'm concerned, the bottom line is we don't need Bovaer anyway. There is no problem with methane. There never has been, and there never will be. It's a ridiculous non-event, and to insist on it in for milk production or beef production, I do feel that this is potentially part of the agenda where we talked about last time, that they want us ultimately not to be eating meat, in which would obviously include beef, but and not to be having dairy either. So, given that overall agenda, I think we've got to be overall suspicious of things that are being introduced now that we've never used to have to do before and were never considered necessary before. So, I think suspicion has got to be the name of the game.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think as people are listening to this, people are going to think of Bovaer, we don't need it, we don't want it. You're absolutely right. The public don't want it. But I think what's also important to highlight is that, yes, this is milk, this is dairy, but of course we're looking at cheese, we're looking at butter, we're looking at all dairy products, and many of them that people are seeing in their supermarkets right now. Check the packaging. Is this from Arla? Does this have Bovaer in it? If you want to make that informed choice. But I'm sure we're going to be talking about Bovaer and Arla very much more in the future, because it seems to have gone a little bit quiet. But thank you so much, Roger, for that. And also the YouTube that you put out, Roger, that's on the end of part 2 of our trio of interviews. And also there is a YouTube link, and all of the details will be in the article that'll be accompanying this interview. But I think the way that we've been talking about Bovaer and food, it just segues us very nicely, doesn't it, Sandy? Because I know that you've got just a few slides left about the future of food and what we might be eating in the future. Will we all be eating bugs? Sandy, take us through your last few slides on food.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you, Roger, for that Bovaer stuff. Yes, well, unfortunately, the future of food isn't particularly good in the UK at the moment, because we've got renewables really taking over the land from the food production. Our land is now really being populated with all these wind farms and solar farms and housing and rewilding, anything but food. And this is the worry. Our land is being given over to renewables, with more planned of up to 6,000 acres each. When the wind doesn't blow, or it blows too hard, and the sun doesn't shine, where is the energy? I mean, England isn't the sunniest place in the world, is it? The storage technology hasn't been developed yet, and there's large drops throughout the year in the actual sort of production of any energy at all. Ed Miliband has forced the acceleration of renewable energy, saying it will decrease energy bills. This is actually not true. Far from reducing our bills, it will drive energy bills up. Last year, each consumer paid £40 in constraint payments to the owners of wind farms asked to turn off their turbines. This figure is forecast to increase by £150 per household by 2026. The Energy Secretary claims that thousands of new jobs will be created in wind and solar, but for who? The Chinese are making all these solar panels. Who's actually benefiting from this? I don't believe it's the UK. So really, the infrastructure, these huge things that the turbines and the solar farms are not, they're actually quite toxic. The wind turbines, they kill birds, and you can't, once they're done, they only have a lifespan, I think, of 12 years. You can't dispose of them. They have to be buried under the earth. And it's likewise with the solar panels. They can leach toxins into the farmland. So I don't know what use they are actually. And what's really worrying is that land mapping, as I said earlier, for the future is increasing all of this. So where will the food come from? We need to ask that question. And this came to my attention in 2020. It's a Agricultural Productivity Working Group report. And they focused on new production methods for farming. They talk about autonomous systems becoming widespread and having largely taken the place of people, within farms, that they're going to replace farm workers with robotics. That's the kind of, the future that they see for us. Autonomous soil testing combined with the use of small fleets of robots powered by 5G. And they're seeing this as 24/7. They're going to have robotic farming 24/7. So it's going to take out the workforce, the farming workforce that we have now. And farmers need to be aware of this, because a lot of the time it's farmers on their own. So they're going to be replaced. That's what they're going to do. Bigger farmers, yes, they employ workers, but a lot of farmers now do their own work because it's so expensive. And certainly the small to medium-sized farms. So, we've got agri-farming methods, that have been pushed into our natural sort of farming. They're using 5G a lot. They're putting 5G collars on cows. Well, they did in Somerset. They were trialing 5G collars on cows to monitor their output of milk and how much they're eating and what's going on in their bodies. All of this is being monitored. And so they're using a lot of data, and data is central to enabling these new systems to work. They also want not the farmers not to be able to pass their farms down, and obviously that's been evident with the inheritance tax. But that this is also in this document saying that in order to create a centralised professional body for farming and horticulture, you'll have to actually go through a training process. And this professional body will be overlooked by a framework under which all systems will be managed. So I see this as another push in the whole plan to really get all the data from our farms into the government, so that the government can monitor everything. And it's all about stakeholder capitalism and stakeholder profit and data entry, unfortunately. I'm going to move on to a very disturbing report by Sainsbury's, and I would urge anybody to look this up. This is the Sainsbury's Future of Food report. You can just Google it, find it. And the CEO of Sainsbury's has said, in the future, farmers won't exist. The supermarkets will produce all the food for the future using AI technology. So there is this plan not to have farmers at all, in my view. This is what they're pushing for the future. And the Future of Food report, literally, it goes from 2025 to 2169. And it's a very comprehensive report. And Claire Hughes, the head of quality and innovation at Sainsbury's, said by 2169, working alongside our suppliers and producers, we predict to have introduced foods like jellyfish and patch dinners to the public diet that are not even fathomable. And so they talk about patch dinners, and I thought, what the hell is a patch dinner? And apparently it's an adhesive transdermal delivery device for the absorption of nutrients. So maybe they're planning on us not eating at all and having these transdermal patches. I mean, the whole thing is absolutely dystopian. I can't believe it. And they say, due to our rising eco-anxiety, health concerns and awareness of animal welfare, it's likely that a quarter of British people will be vegetarian in 2025. I think they're pushing it. It's 2025 now. It says half of us will identify as flexitarians. And we'll have products like banana blossom replacing cod, lots of algae milk lattes. The alternative proteins market is set to soar by 25%. And they're looking at insect carbonara. I mean, they talk all this horrendous kind of replacement protein stuff. So this is what they see. They say 2050, we could start to see cultured meat shift from an expensive experiment to becoming more of an everyday item. So they're talking about fake meat, basically. Sainsbury's could be selling home lab-grown meat kits, which can be picked up from the lab-grown aisle. So it's a very long-term project, because they're talking about 150 years or so. It's pretty dystopian anyway, and I'd urge people to look at that. It's not very good.
Sandy, I'm sort of sitting here. It's not often that I'm that speechless, because let's face it, we're living in 2025 and anything goes, it would seem. So I've just written a couple of things down here. So insect carbonara, no thank you. Lab grown aisles in supermarkets, no thank you. And I just wanted to say that you mentioned transdermal there. And transdermal, of course, means through the skin. And we're going to come to Roger in a minute, because I know Roger's got something to say too. But I'm just wondering, and I'm just going to throw it out there, that in this age of what we appear to be going into of transhumanism, then perhaps the human of the future, or not the human of the future, the transhuman of the future, is going to require a transdermal food, either through skin or absorbed through any other orifice, I presume. I'm not sure. I'm just a little bit speechless. Who wants to, Roger, would you like to add anything there before Sandy just carries on with her report?
Yeah, I mean, I've read the report, and it is quite bizarre. I mean, it even talks about a sin tax for eating meat, and that was suggested by a group called FAIR, FAIRR, that was founded in 2016, which was supposed to be recommending, the ESGs and their vision to rebuild agriculture. So, I mean, this really is the government looking to take over farms and tell farmers what they want to be planted, rather than let farmers know what's best in their own fields and on their own land through historical, learning down through the generations what foods work and what foods don't work in terms of growing crops on their land. So it really is, looking to take over and dictate to the farmers what they're going to do and what they're going to produce. And of course, all these sustainable goals that they've said put forward for businesses. Farming is a business as well, and so a lot of these, maybe even diversity rules are going to be pushed on farmers too, and they'll be fined if they don't introduce them on their farms and all the rest of it. But I mean, this whole Frankenfood thing is just ridiculous. I mean, it brings a whole new meaning to the waiter. There's a fly in my soup.
It certainly does. And I mean, you said the word there, that word, the sustainable word, where clearly none of this is sustainable. It's unsustainable. And you also mentioned, I think you mentioned diversity, inclusion, and equity there, which actually, DIE, diversity, inclusion, equity, seems quite appropriate. I mean, it's just, I'm a little bit speechless. But Sandy, now that you've done that to both myself and Roger, and I know that Roger's read the report, but syntaxes, and I'm just a little bit speechless still. Carry on, Sandy. Tell us a bit more, or do we need to know more?
Well, they talk also about 3D printed meat, and I've seen quite a few films from China where they've perfected it in China using stem cells. The thing is that, stem cells from what? You don't know what you're eating. And yes, they do have the ability to 3D print meat. And on the Sainsbury's Future Food, there is a big diagram of how food will be in the future. And it's quite dystopian. And they even talk about growing food in space by 2169. And they've got, pictures, illustrations of 3D printed meat and crickets and algae and jellyfish and seaweed and all these different replacement proteins. And, it's, as far as I'm concerned, they're just as Roger said, they are looking at ways of replacing our farmers and putting it into the hands of big corporations like supermarkets. It could be any corporation. I mean, as we know, Bill Gates owns a lot of land in America. The big corporations are literally it's almost as though the farmers are being pushed into this land grab, where they won't be in control of their land. It will be big corporations with this kind of dystopian future for food, and it's not good.
So, okay, Sandy, thank you for that. I think we're all a little bit gobsmacked, but you talked about climate myths there, and I know that, Roger, you've got something to say about why we're being driven by these climate myths. Take us through that.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? If you speak to some people who are sort of scared, that they are genuinely scared themselves about the whole climate thing. I'm not saying that a lot of people just have picked up the wrong end of the stick and have bought into the whole scaremongering themselves. But if you ask them what the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is, most of them haven't got a clue. They'll probably say something like 20%. And actually, the current rate of or level of CO2 in the atmosphere is 420 parts per million, which is 0.042%, which is well below the 6,000 parts per million when the Earth was at its greenest, and much closer, we're at the moment, to the 150 parts per million below which life cannot survive. So, we need to get the CO2 up. We don't need to get it down. Similarly, methane is 1,911 parts per billion, and as a percentage, that is 0.0000 0.1911% of the atmosphere. So it's absolutely tiny. The insects actually produce more methane than cattle. But, ultimately, wherever it's being produced, whether it's in insects or in cattle, but even outside of cattle, or sort of, when vegetation is rotting, it's bacteria that ultimately generate the methane. So shifting it from in and out of different species isn't really changing the problem anyway. As far as I'm aware, there has been no actual sort of work done to see what the effect of using Bovaer on climate is. All they do is they talk about, well, it reduces methane coming out of cows, but the fact that it might, that you're going to get other gases and like hydrogen, whatever, being produced instead. They don't talk about, well, what will that do? Because if hydrogen oxidizes, it produces water vapor, and water vapor is an even greater greenhouse gas supposedly than CO2 and methane. So that all they're doing is a bit like what we've done with our industry. We've banished our manufacturing industries in the UK, sent them to China and India, and then all the pollution's being produced there instead of here. And we sort of pat ourselves on the back, but all we've done is just move it around the world. And they're trying to do the same really with the methane production as well. And methane itself has a 10-year carbon cycle. So, it really, in the grand scale of how long the planet's been going and how much longer it's going to keep going if we don't blow it up with nuclear weapons, then 10 years is nothing in that long scale. Just before Christmas, I came across a paper which I think is the fundamental thing to the whole climate issue anyway, is that there is actually no planetary greenhouse gas effect anyway. Radiation does not determine the Earth's temperature. Convection does. And that's only, so heat leaves and it's only stopped by clouds. And everybody knows, if you've, in the middle of the summer, if, the temperature drops on those evenings where there is no cloud cover. Nothing keeps that, it is cloud cover that keeps our heat in. And yet this idea that they're doing all these cloud seeding to generate clouds, and actually that actually increases the warming of the planet rather than reducing it. I mean, it just shows how ridiculous and how stupid it is. And so ultimately, all the climate models that they've done that are based on the greenhouse gas effects are completely bogus because it's based on a myth. There's been other papers published where temperature rises before CO2, not the other way around. It's just poor modeling, and there's various different cycles which aren't taken into consideration, like the Milankovitch cycles, and they don't look at what happens with the oceans currents and how that feeds into the whole climate issue as well. So there's huge gaps in their modeling, and what the new theory has actually discovered, that it is the weight of the atmosphere itself and the potential energy of the weight of all the gases that actually override and control the temperature of our planet. And the great thing about this paper, I think, that gives it great credibility, is that they've looked at the data not only for planet Earth, but they've looked at it for other planets as well, and it works for other planets. So a model based on this new theory that actually fits all the planets that they've got the data for, to me, must therefore be far more likely to be true than any figures based on model that doesn't even fit the data that we have got for our own planet, let alone any others. So the whole thing is a fallacy, and we actually know that grassland actually sequesters carbon, and it increases carbon sequestering and reduces carbon dioxide anyway. So we actually need more land to be put to grassland with cattle growing on it, and it's the cattle moving around that actually helps to keep the soil healthy as well. And this is a process that's been actually used by a chap called Dr. Alan Savory in Africa, where they've got herds of goats and sheep and move them around these arid areas, and they've found that actually breaks up the soil, and obviously the dung from the cattle, from whether it's cattle or sheep or goats or whatever, that then gets incorporated into the soil, and it sort of rejuvenates the soil, and then other plants can grow. So and we're seeing that the planet is greening overall anyway. So there's what they're trying to get us to achieve with climate and with methane is totally wrong anyway. And what's even worse is the factors they're introducing to try and achieve it are actually adding to what actually they see the problem as, instead of actually solving it anyway. So the whole thing is such a mess. And I was saying, there's close to me in Wiltshire, there's people probably heard about Lyme Down, or may have heard of Lyme Down, which is a massive solar farm which they're looking at trying to build in Wiltshire, which obviously doesn't need to go ahead. And I sent an email to the guys who are arranging the demonstration and the counter arguments for it. And I said, you need to talk about this whole climate issue not being based on anything truthful, because at the moment, if you don't talk about the fact that there's no greenhouse gas, it becomes a NIMBY effect. You just don't want it in your backyard, whereas actually it doesn't need to be anybody's backyard because it's fundamentally unnecessary. And so this is the message that I think, when it comes to climate, that we need to get out, that there is no greenhouse effect. And therefore, everything based on that premise, including net zero and the absolute zero that Sandy discovered as well, it really is such a bad agenda, and it will bankrupt the country if we're not already bankrupt already. That we need to sort of get a grip. Otherwise, we really are on a very slippery slope very quickly.
And on that note, Roger, I don't want any of this. And I would imagine that the audience that are watching this right now and the chat box are probably saying, we don't want this either. The public do not want this. And yet the government are going to, and the United Nations agenda, and all that we've heard from both of you over the last two parts, they're going to force this on us. What can we do? Because we don't want wind farms. We don't want solar farms. What can we do? What's your message to us as consumers?
Us as consumers, but also, we need the farmers to cooperate as well. So as consumers, we need locally produced UK grown produce. That is the healthiest that we can eat. We need to buy direct as much as possible from the farmers, with as fewer middlemen and wholesalers as possible, so that the farmers get sufficient income from their produce. And the public can still buy it at a good price that the supermarkets have forced it down to. It may go up a bit, but obviously if the middle guys aren't taking their money out, then the farmers will get a much better price. Our price won't change hugely, and everybody be much better off. And we need nutritious food. We need the ground to be farmed regeneratively too. The farmers do have their part to play in this. These monocrops are the crops that are using all the pesticides and the agrochem. And again, as consumers, we don't want that either. We appreciate good food, but we want it to be produced regeneratively, so that the land is genuinely being looked after and in a fit state to be handed down through the generations. So it will be slightly less efficient, and it won't be so intensively reared, but that's good welfare, which makes the food even more nutritious for us. There's various work done on nutrition to show that grass-fed beef is more healthy for us than grain-fed beef, for example. So there are advantages all the way around. We don't need these solar farms and wind farms on fertile ground, as we sort of mentioned, as Sandy talked about in part two. The ban that they're talking about using for shipping and aviation means that if we aren't producing the food, then we can't ship it in if there's no aviation and shipping going on. So the only solution is that we've got to produce our food ourselves. So we need the farmers to carry on farming. We don't want the government and corporations telling the farmers what to do, and we need the public obviously to support the farmers during that transition, and to source our food as locally as possible. And I think it's doable. I think the good that has come out of the Bovaer situation is, I think, more food groups, and there are more farmers who are open now to supplying more locally and directly, and there are more people looking to buy. But that is something which needs to expand up and gear up and become the norm rather than the exception.
So what we're looking at, everybody watching, is we're looking at a collaboration. We're looking at everybody joining together. And that's not just us, the consumers, the public, those of us who are buying food. That's the farmers, as Roger has said, and also the vets as well. So if farmers, vets, and the public can all stick together and support our local farmers, then we might actually get somewhere, because currently the UK is looking extremely unstable and unsustainable to me. And I know, with so much going on in the news, both of you, we've got bird flu, we've got mad cow disease, we've got all sorts of different diseases springing up all over the place that we're getting warning alerts for, etc. We've got issues with testing, which, Roger, we've spoken about before with regards to PCR testing. But one thing I do want to throw out to both of you for your comments is this climate and nature bill that is coming in almost by stealth, but has huge repercussions in the grander scheme of things. And of course, it's not just in the UK with the climate and nature bill, but other European countries and other countries in the West, they have their equivalent. But who wants to go first with regards to the impacts or possible impacts of the climate and nature bill?
Well, I've been looking quite deeply into this because I've been asked to do another interview on it, and it's interesting because, having looked at the Absolute Zero document, this is almost giving it the go-ahead, in my view. So it's called the Climate and Nature Bill, and it's an acceleration of the 2008 Climate Change Act, and it's been brought together by the Climate Change Committee and what they call the JNCC, which is the Joint Nature Conservation Committee. Now, what people may not know is way back in 2019, Theresa May planted a massive bomb before she left office in May 2019. She amended the 2008 Climate Change Act and brought in a statutory instrument to that act, encoding climate change into UK law. So we're the only country in the world to have done this. So I think that what she implemented then in 2019, this is what it is. This is the Climate and Nature Bill. They've obviously worked on it, and it's legally binding. And it gives the Secretary of State a duty to implement a strategy to eradicate the UK's net contribution to climate change by 2050. And it's basically restoring it to pre-industrial revolution levels. Now, firstly, they will establish a climate and nature assembly to advise the government on that strategy. And then they've got 12 months after passing the bill, they will have to lay the strategy before Parliament. Now, what's interesting is the Act mentions significantly reducing CO2 on imports to the UK. Now, this is where I think the climate and nature, the Absolute Zero document of 2018-2019 really kicks in, because in that, as we know, they want to get rid of all shipping and all flying in and out of the UK by 2050. And this is what I think it's all about. I mean, there's obviously a lot more in that document. People need to look at it. I think we did feature it in the last episode. But in my view, this bill is really the bill that it aims to keep us cold, hungry, and poor. At the moment, we're poorer than the poorest state in the United States, which is Mississippi. And under Starmer, unfortunately, we'll dive deeper into that poverty if we don't stop it, and we need to. That's my contribution to the CAN bill.
Yes, that's a very valuable contribution, and thank you. As I understand it, I think there's another reading for the bill coming up, or as this broadcast goes out, it will have already come up in Parliament again. And as I understand it, it's looking at land grabs in the form of, we're looking at more wind farms, we're looking at more solar farms, we're looking at more smart meters, we're looking at more heat pumps, we're looking at surveillance, we're looking at tracking, we're looking at tracing, all the things that we've been talking about over this now the third interview. All of those things seem to culminate in this climate and nature bill, of which I have to add, there are no dates in this bill. There's very little detail in this bill. So they're keeping it all quite close to their chest. But I definitely agree, and I think it's 100% we have to keep our eyes firmly on that, especially as all of these private members' bills go through pretty much by stealth. So on climate and nature, Roger, is there anything that you would like to add on the climate and nature bill?
Yes, Debbie, I think I agree with you. It is, part setting everything up for this land grab, because they'll pass this bill and it may look fairly innocuous if you read through it and take it at face value. But of course, the problems with acts is once they're enacted, then they can be tweaked and changed that much more easily in future, and therefore make it that much easier to grab the land. And we've sort of hinted at it already today in that how the government is looking to to tell the farmers how to use that land. So if they decide that this farm isn't productive enough because we've asked it to do these crops, and even though that crop isn't suitable for that land, so therefore it's not producing the yield that we want, so therefore we're going to put it into solar farm, because actually we've committed ourselves so much to artificial intelligence, as Starmer has been talking and telling us about recently, and that takes so much energy that we actually need to increase the land use for energy production rather than food production, because we're actually not being able to produce enough electricity any other way. And, we're going to end up in a two-tier Starmer, two-tier system whereby industry will be prioritized for electricity because they want to make the money out of the artificial intelligence and the rest of it. And the rest of us who want electricity for living our lives will be restricted, and we'll have blackouts and all the rest of it. So and they talk about getting rid of fossil fuels. I mean, the amount of oil and lubrication that these wind farms need and all the rest of it. I mean, it's a joke that the idea that they can get rid of fossil fuels and oil and all the rest of it. It's but it is all part of this land grab. It is absolutely that, and it's setting this climate and nature bill is setting down the basis that they can tweak it in future and grab whatever they want to, whenever they want to.
Yes, you're quite correct. They really are grabbing. And I can see Sandy with your hand up there, because I know you're desperately wanting to come in with something extra. Go on, Sandy.
Yeah, I do think that this is also what we mentioned earlier on in I think the first episode, that there is this financial instrument that they've brought in for, it's called biodiversity net gain, for land and to control the land under sustainable development. And I think that will really kick in, where they will start controlling the land, because they'll say, right, you're not complying to sustainable development, and for the climate and nature bill, your land isn't sustainable as far as energy is concerned. So this is the way they will control things. And also, they do mention in that bill the planetary diet. I do think that they've got plans to actually put us on that planetary diet, which you can look up. It's in the C40 Cities document. And it's a form of rationing. It's what you can and can't eat, and how much of different food groups you can and can't eat. So they really want to control everything and keep us, as I say, cold, hungry and poor.
Well, it's interesting you say that, actually, Sandy, because, you say one diet. What you've said about the diet, this planetary diet, it's almost like it's one diet, one health, new world order, one everything. It's like, it really does feel to me as though we're going to be feeding a different species and not humans like us. So I'm seeing a very dark side to that. But you're talking about land grabs, and you're talking about the way that farmers may lose their land with wind, solar, and a multitude of other reasons why they'll lose their land, inheritance tax being one of them. But I just want to bring to your attention, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but I've only just picked up on it in the last couple of days, that the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology put out a little video on X. I'm sure we can find it and put a link in the article. But they're talking about growth zones, AI, artificial intelligence growth zones. These are factories for AI, and they're going to be using farmers' fields, to build these Well, they're going to be transforming fields to build these huge, great big AI factories, complexes. And these are going to be in places in the UK that are readily accessible to excess electricity. I can tell you now that the first place that is going to have one of these AI growth zones is a place called Culham in South Oxfordshire, so fairly close to Abingdon. And if you're living in South Oxfordshire now and you don't know about it, then please look up AI growth zone, because it's coming to you very, very soon. And Culham, as I believe, is just south of Abingdon, I believe, and it's only 3 square miles, and it's only got 453 population. So you can imagine the amount of people that are going to be coming in and out to that huge, great big factory. So yeah, growth zones, the artificial intelligence opportunities plan. It's called Opportunities Action Plan, I beg your pardon, is what it's called. So yeah, that's coming too. Roger, would you like to comment on that perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it's laughable, the idea that excess energy, when we're struggling to, was it last week or the week before, we didn't have that much electricity in reserve. And then you've got the likes of Google and Amazon in the States talking about saying they're going to have to build at least 4 nuclear power stations in order just to supply sufficient energy for their AI in the future. So the idea that AI is it's just this little thing we just tag on the end. It's like, no, AI, when it gets to that level, and if they want to introduce autonomous vehicles and all those sorts of things that will run off it, and that the whole Internet of Things and the Internet of Bodies, which will all require this AI and 5G and electricity, all the rest of it, the idea that can be just tagged off on the end of excess energy is quite laughable, actually. We know that it's going to require whole power stations on its own just to be powered, and we haven't got enough power stations to do ourselves. And we know that, as Sandy was saying, the air and the solar, the wind and the solar, you've got to have a parallel energy grid working alongside it, because when those aren't available, you've got to still produce the power. So they can't get rid of conventional power stations really anyway, not unless they want to leave us completely destitute of power altogether. So it just shows how little they understand what they're talking about, and they think, oh, AI, it sounds all great, and it sounds like we can do this and we can do that, and it will control, it will take our jobs, great. But it's still got to be powered, and the amount of power it will take is phenomenal, and there just seems to be no comprehension. And this is, again, part of why I say I think this climate and nature bill is setting the land up to be grabbed, because they're going to need it. If they want to go down their AI to the extent that Keir Starmer's talked about, and the project that you've discovered as well, Debbie, then they've got to get that energy from somewhere. And if they're not going to do old-fashioned power stations, then they're going to have to cover the whole country in solar and wind. There won't be room for any of us, let alone 15-minute cities.
Let's hope there's plenty of us to witness what is going to happen, because this is going to happen unless we take a stand. And it's not just net zero, because I see that after speaking to you both for quite some time now, I can see that that's pretty much impossible. Net zero is impossible. You need fossil fuels for at least 5% of what they're doing. So it's completely impossible. But of course, there's also digital ID. How long before all of us are swiping in to how long is it before a farmer swipes in to get to go near their herd, for example, or to get to go into their farmhouse, or access the vets, or access provisions or feed? We don't know. I do want to end on rather a serious note, and perhaps one that some people may not have already picked up on too much, for both of your comments, because predominantly when we started out on these 3 interviews, and thank you so much, because they are gold dust, because they're so comprehensive and have so much information in them. But when we started out on this, we started out by talking about how busy farmers were and are, and that they don't have the time to do all of this research and to find out what you two have found out, which is extraordinary. Both of you should be professors. I think you've done 2, 3, 4 PhDs in one in all of this research. But not only does this affect farmers physically losing their farms, and they're busy and they're tired, but it also affects their mental health. And I went to look at the Big Farming Survey from RABI, RABI, in 2021, which revealed that 36% of farmers in the UK are probably or possibly depressed, and 47% are struggling with anxiety. Only 8% of women and 12% of men reported good mental well-being. Only 8% of women and 12% of men. When I went to look at the Office for National Statistics, I found that in England and Wales, there were 36 suicides associated to the farming community in 2021-2022. And also there were many farm workers, 22 farm workers, who lost their lives to fatal accidents in the years 2021 to 2022. So I want to put out a helpline number if there is anybody listening or watching that might need some help or might need some support. And we will put this information in the article at the bottom of this interview. But if you do need help, there is a helpline number, 0800 188 4444, where RABI, RABI, will get in touch with a farming charity on your behalf and put you in contact with someone who might be able to help. And on that note, Roger, Sandy, maybe I'll come to you, Roger, first, because you meet many farmers on a daily basis. You have a farming background. Can you talk any more, and indeed vets as well, mental health? Can you talk a little bit more about that and the stress that all of this is doing to them?
I mean, as you say, the farmers are under stress to make ends meet as it is with the pressure from the supermarkets. They're given enticing offers to turn their land over to do other things because they're not being encouraged to farm food, and yet we need them to do so. And then we've got the PCR tests and things being threatened to be used to take away their flocks or of birds, and we haven't seen it come in for cattle here and avian flu here yet. Hopefully it won't. But again, I would push those farmers who are watching this just to check out what we've already put out on the PCR, because that will put another pressure. And I know how upsetting, or how upset farmers were when BSE happened and there was the funeral pyres of the cows. Farmers were absolutely distraught and cut to pieces by having to go through that. So the people need to be aware the farmers are under huge pressure, and there is potential pressure mounting not only from the inheritance tax for you financially, but also potentially if they're going to be told how to farm, they can't even farm their own lands that they know what to do with, and they'll be told to do something completely opposite that they know to begin with isn't going to work, and then they know that they're potentially going to be penalised when it doesn't work. It's all going to add pressure to them. So I would say to those farmers, talk to your friends, check up on somebody if you're worried about one of your farmer mates, or if any of the vets out there have got farmers that they recognise that they're struggling, they see them between visits. So people who see everybody on a daily basis, you don't necessarily notice that slow deterioration, but somebody who sees farmers and people generally, if you see them on an infrequent basis and you suddenly do notice a big deterioration in terms of their stress levels and mental health, then look out for them, call them out, say how are you doing, support each other, and that is get professional help as well. But your best help will come from your closest friends and family as well. And I know it is a male tendency to bottle things up, and especially when the farmers are out in the tractors on their own and they're sitting there, they've got lots of time maybe to think about things as well. So please don't suffer in silence. Please talk to your neighbours, talk to your friends. It's not a sign of weakness. We need you farmers. We do need you, honestly, to help us get through this as well. And we will try and help you come through it too, because at the other side, on a positive note, I think we will come out of this. The system is so harebrained and ridiculous, it can't possibly succeed. So there is another side to it that where we will need your food production, and we will need you farmers and your knowledge of your fields. So hang in there and support everybody as much as you possibly can.
Thank you, Roger. That was amazing, and I'd like to sort of really endorse what you said. I do believe that we've got a positive future if we can actually get the farmers on board to understand exactly where this is going. I can't help but feel that because of the lawful nature of this bill and the amount of MPs are behind it. I mean, do look at 0 Hour, which is the group that are pushing this, interestingly. 0 Hour was the term that Pol Pot used for his regime. And it really means replacing the old regime with the new. And this group is called 0 Hour. Look it up. They've got a whole list of MPs that are actually for this bill, supporting this bill. And we need to really go to our MPs, write a letter. There's plenty of templates around. I've created one. I can actually give it to Debbie, a template for your MP to send and to really put forward your worries about this bill and how concerning it is. Because in my view, they're using the UK as an example. Because if they can actually crack the UK with this in legislation and really crack, the UK, they can implement this throughout Europe and everywhere else. So I just think we're being targeted at the moment, and our poor farmers have to understand this, and that if we don't stop this, then it is the end of British farming as we know it, and in a way, the end of Britain as we know it. So it's really imperative that we make some sort of stand to oppose this bill. It's inhuman, and it's awful that farmers should actually be under such stress and in such danger of taking their own lives. I mean, how awful is that our main food producers are in this state? And, I would urge anyone to look at 0 Hour, look at the MPs that are forcing this bill through, and write to your MP. And if you want a template, I have one. Thank you.
Sandy, Roger, thank you so much. And to the public out there, you really do need to support the farmers. And to all of you farmers out there, we do need you. We do want your food. We want your beautiful food. We will support you. We will get through this. We will. This has been the most fascinating series of interviews I think that I've ever done. I think it has so much information, valuable information for everybody, but in particular for you, farmers. We do love you. We love your food. We love what you do for us. You are feeding our families, and for families, future generations. That's what we want. We want to secure your beautiful food for our children, for our grandchildren, and for their children. And I don't think there's any better time now other than to thank you both so much for all your hours and hours and hours of research. But first, I'm going to throw to you, Sandy, for your last word. And then, Roger, my grateful thanks to both of you for your last word too. So, Sandy, over to you for the last word.
Thanks so much, Debbie, for the opportunity of being able to do this and get the message out to farmers. And I'd urge them to look at all the information that we've put forward. And I know it's hard, but please look at all this information. It's beyond conspiracy. It is not conspiracy. It's now a pressing issue that if we don't keep our British farming the way it is and not engage with all this AI, as Roger said, it's going to, it doesn't. None of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. And I'm sure farmers would agree with that. The whole net zero thing, and not even net zero, they want absolute zero. Absolute zero means nothing biological will live. There's no sense in that, and that includes us. So please listen to what this series has to say, and don't pass it off as conspiracy. It is happening. Thank you.
Yeah, just to back up on that, thanks, Sandy. Just to say, we went to great lengths to make sure that we only put document-supported evidence into this series, so that not our documents, but their documents. So everything we have told you is actually their words, not ours. All we're doing is presenting them to you. But on a positive note, I think those people who are consumers who are out there watching this, I would encourage you to reach out to your local farmers and find where you can source food locally. And to farmers who are watching this, I would urge you also, A, to keep going, and B, to reach out to local organisers who perhaps got groups of people who are interested in buying food direct. So the positive is there. We will get through this. We will survive. And I'm just quickly hand you back to Sandy for the very final word.
This is just a cautionary tale, actually. I know there's a lot of groups who are urging the farmers to blockade supermarkets. Now, in my view, this is not a good idea. By all means, encourage people not to shop at supermarkets, but you can't stop them, and that's what I fear is happening. Now, this playbook was used in the Bolshevik Revolution very quickly. It was the farmers were being taxed, and the state they ended up rising up and protesting, and the state seized their land because they said they were preventing food supply. Now, we need to look at history once again and not let that happen again, because we don't want any excuse for the farmers to be against the people. The people have to make their own mind up, and we can't tell people what to do. We can only encourage them. Otherwise, the farmers could be seen to be preventing the food supply. We don't want that to happen. Just one thing.